Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 7. This week is going to be a pretty big one. We have a pretty big simulation. It is available. The link is found in the discussion instructions. You are going to use either the stagnation or the roller coaster case. Pick whichever one you want. You're going to download table 3 and table 1 and screenshot all your results for your final project. This simulation you can do as many times as you want. You can resume it later. We're going to have a quiz and a discussion board besides that simulation. So here is what table 3 looks like, table 1, and here are more results, fiscal policy and monetary policy. That's a lot of different results. You can, be sure to screenshot all of these because you'll want to use those in the final project for this week for the discussion board. Pick one that interests you really. Here are the instructions. Which policy decisions were the most successful and why? So you have 3 questions. This is the first one. It's talking about the economic outlook. What I want you to focus on in this second bullet is the differences between an open and a closed economy when we're considering government policy. So government policy would either be fiscal or monetary policy. And so how does that look different? And then the final question bullet, I want you to focus on consumer sentiment. I'm going to give you some takeaways and then a couple of examples. I hope you find this to be helpful. This is kind of a big one. For the first bullet, I think you can figure out which ones were most successful. So I'm not going to kind of give you a takeaway from that. Remember, I don't care if you're successful or not. If you play it and you are not successful, write that in there. That does not mean you don't understand anything about the economy. These simulations are a little tricky. So let's go to that second bullet. Open versus closed economy. So an open economy is one that trades with others, that does business with others, like the US. A closed economy is one that does not. Think about North Korea as a closed economy. So open economies are going to be impacted by other countries. We can see this as good or bad. Think about the Great Recession. The whole world was impacted by this, Great Recession, whereas a closed economy was probably a little less impacted than an open economy. If we are struggling economically and we have a closed economy, we have no one to lean on to help us through. But like in times of the Great Recession, when an economy is doing well, it's going to be less impacted by damaging economic conditions from another country. In an open economy, fiscal policy impacts the exchange rate and the trade balance. These are so important when we're thinking about doing business with others, because really trade is what it's all about. If we did not do business with others, really the exchange rate wouldn't matter. In the case of an expansion, the rise in interest rates due to government borrowing attracts foreign capital. In their attempt to get more dollars to invest, foreigners bid up the price of the dollar or whatever currency you're thinking about, causing an exchange rate appreciation in the short run. The appreciation makes the imported goods cheaper in the US and exports more expensive, leading to a decline of the merchandise trade balance. Foreigners sell more to the US than they buy from it, right? We import a lot more than we export, and in return acquire ownership of US assets, including government debt. In the long run, the accumulation of debt that results from government deficits can lead foreigners to distrust US assets and cause a depreciation in the exchange rate. What they're meaning by this is that if our economy is not seen as solid, if we are seen as borrowing a lot of money, they will not value our dollar in the same way. You can see this happening in a developing country. That is why a lot of times they will peg their exchange rate to the dollar or another developed country, because their economy is somewhat unstable. You can think of Venezuela as an economy that has had some instability in their economy. I hope this is helpful. If you have any further questions, let me know. The key is to know that an open economy leads you to be impacted by others, where a closed does not. The closed, the bad side is that no one can help lift you out of it during a recession. So let's go on to consumer sentiment. This is a graph. If you ever want a graph of any data, the easiest way is to go to Google and type in Fed, which is the Federal Reserve, and then type in what you want to know. This is our consumer sentiment. And you can see that it's gone up and down over the years. Here was a recession, here was a recession, here was a short recession, here was a recession. You can see those kind of put in gray for us. The interesting part is, look here, this wasn't a recession, this wasn't a recession, this was not a recession. So you can see that sometimes our consumer sentiment falls in times other than a recession, which is super interesting. Consumer sentiment is basically how confident the consumer is in the economy, in spending, in buying stuff. Do they think their jobs are going to be there? Do they think that our economy is heading upward? That's sort of what this confidence measures. So you could, talk about this graph if you wanted to. This is also a really helpful link. This is from the University of Michigan. They're the ones that create a lot of the consumer sentiment data that we find on Fred. And they have a page in here called The Impact of Emotions on Expectations. And it kind of explains the why of the data. Here's an example. In 2020, remember COVID, here's a quote they used detailing how the event was explained. A negative evaluation is likely to diminish the influence of a positive change. So even if the economy is doing well, if we think it's going to be negative, it can influence us just as much as a positive evaluation can downplay negative events. While the conscious mind can override the attached evaluation, it is uncommon since emotions are learned and constantly revised. So basically, that means that consumer sentiment can be based on economic conditions, and it can also be based on what we're seeing in the news, what's happening to us personally, maybe a small hunk of the economy where we live isn't doing well, or our particular industry. So a lot of things shape consumer sentiment, and it's not just the economy. Here's an example. Someone's talking about each section. So that first bullet, they talk about their data there. Then they're talking about an open versus a closed economy here. And then finally, they're going to talk about consumer sentiment. It looks like they go into the University of Michigan data as well. So consider some of this information if you're struggling to kind of come up with pieces. Here is an example of a reply. They're talking about their results versus that other person's, and then talking about how consumers are at the core of the economy. And that's very interesting, because really economics is about consumer behavior. It's not about money and spending and things like that. What's great about this discussion board is it talks about consumer sentiment, and that is basically just our behavior, what we think and believe, rather than the hardcore data. I hope you find this week to be interesting. We are nearing the end, so please let me know if you have any questions. Have a great week.